Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar today. Today, we are here with Dave Pettit. He's a Director of Facilities at Joplin Schools. We're also with Darren Porter. He's our K-12 practice leader at FMX. And my name is Mark Stitt, and I lead marketing at FMX. For those of you not familiar, FMX is a leading provider of facilities and maintenance management solutions to help organizations accelerate operational excellence. Our software enables them to streamline processes, increase operational productivity, and turn actionable insights into meaningful results. I'm looking forward to talking with you today. We're going to begin by Dave sharing a little bit about himself and a little bit about the district. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you.
Great. So tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the district.
Well, I work for Joplin Schools in Joplin, Missouri. We're a town of about 50,000 people, sits in the southwest corner of the state. The unusual part about our town is that because we are a regional hub for both medical and entertainment and retail, that on any given weekday, we swell to about 250,000 people in our town. So that's the school district where I have been for the last 26 years. Love my job working here. It's a great group of people, great community.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us today. So Dave, this is not the first time that you've run into, challenges and certainly opportunities. Tell us about 2011, what happened in Joplin. Many may not recall this.
Sure. It's, we're getting ready to look at the anniversary of 9 years coming up, but in May 22nd of 2011, we had an F5 tornado that came through our town, destroyed approximately a third of our town as it came through just about the center of the town. Took out a lot of residences, a lot of business, did, as it states there, about $2.8 billion worth of damage, and actually, all told, almost 160 lives lost.
Wow, just devastating. I certainly recall it, but some of our viewers maybe hadn't. And it had a great impact on the district and the students as well. Things back to normal now, 9 years later, after the tornado?
We have a new normal, I would say, but we are back into all of our buildings. We've rebuilt. We had 10 locations that had some sort of damage. We had 6 total lost buildings, and so we've taken care of those. We had approximately 3,200 students that were displaced with housing due to that damage. And so I feel like we're back to a good point. The nice thing is that with each and every day, we tend to think back to that time less and less.
Great. Well, I know those in your role and many of our viewers, have these types of facility leader roles where it's not only the schools and the students, but really you're a community leader in terms of helping those things get back to normal. So thank you for your efforts. With us today is also Darren Porter. He's a practice leader here at FMX for our K through 12 education customers, and he himself is a facilities leader. We're going to be hearing from Darren a little bit later in our program, but certainly thank you, Dave, for those comments. I think during that time, you learned a lot about perseverance, right? A lot of adversity. So tell us a little bit about those learnings.
We had a lot of challenges. Of course, with that happening at the end of May, school was terminated for the rest of the session. I think we were about 8 or 10 days short of actually finishing up the school year. But the challenge is that post-tornado, trying to figure out how we were going to hold school in the fall. And so a lot of people worked really hard to come up with temporary locations. One of those locations was even just a spec building in the industrial park that was just a shell and didn't even have a concrete floor in it. And some 87 days, I think, later, we were holding school in that with classrooms, lockers, everything that was needed for school. So we came up with a lot of unique ways. We also had a building that used to be a store at the mall. And so we held that as one of our high school campuses as well.
Wow. Wow. I mean, we're now in May of 2020 as we're talking here, and we have this pandemic period with COVID-19 and this new normal that we're starting to get used to. And you've certainly been through something greater, if not worse, in many ways. And so I think as part of our program today, we want to investigate that a little bit more and gain your guidance to other leaders about how they maybe should adapt and think about this in serving their students, their district, and their community. So a little bit more about yourself, Dave. Tell us about your background and kind of what you think as far as the role that you serve today.
Well, I come from kind of a unique situation. Started here, almost 27 years now. But started off in the maintenance department as a carpenter, and I'm on my 6th job title with Joplin Schools. Have had a lot of fantastic opportunities and a lot of places where I've gotten to serve. Matter of fact, during the tornado, I was serving as the assistant director of buildings, grounds, and transportation. And at that point in time, my mainstay was the transportation. So I had a really unique view of things during the tornado. But a great school district to work for. Like I said, we take care of 1.8 million square feet. I've got 90 people that work for me between custodial staff and maintenance staff. And we do a really good job of taking care of the existing buildings that we had, as well as the new buildings that we have, and the differences between those two as we come into that.
Mm-hmm. And I see your quote here where you say, "You can prepare, but you will never be prepared. Plan ahead because failure to do so adds chaos to chaos. Trust what you know." Find wisdom there. It's really kind of a message about trying to get ahead and stay ahead because you don't really know what's coming at you. Any comments around that?
Yeah, well, although it sounds counterintuitive, that first statement there, you have to prepare, but things will never happen as you plan on them preparing. And so you have to be available to be flexible, because if you don't do anything, then you're just adding more chaos to the chaos that can ensue, whether it's a tornado or a pandemic or a snow event or whatever that challenge is that you want to try to be the level of reason that you can be, and in thinking ahead towards some of those things and trying to do a little bit of planning will help you be better prepared, but you'll not always be prepared for everything that's going to get thrown at you.
Gotcha. Great guidance, and we'll certainly explore that in our program further. So, some questions for you, Dave. Thank you for being with us today. First, as a district, what steps have you taken to keep everyone connected during this COVID-19 pandemic period of 2020?
Well, we've had the fortunate experience that all of my staff have remained working. We've been seen as essential workers, and so we've been staying in the buildings. So we're trying to stay connected with folks, although trying to maintain social distancing, but we've done a lot of email and keeping communication open. A lot of my staff have had questions, and so they've been able to come to me, and we've tried to get answers together if I don't know. So the biggest thing is that as people have experienced concerns, whether that's patrons or staff members, that we've tried to communicate, be open, forthcoming with all the information that we have. And the biggest thing is just making sure that people know that we care and that we're listening.
Great. Darren, I know you keep up with quite a few school districts, even dozens around the country. What have you been hearing from district officials, facilities leaders, and so forth?
Well, just to follow up a little bit on what Dave was mentioning, and it's a great start just to make sure that people know that you're thinking of them and that you care about them. But some of the tools that I've seen facility managers with a learning curve, of course, ramp up would be, these virtual meetings using the different platforms, Zoom meetings, Hangouts, and Teams, and there's many others out there. But some of these tools may have been almost unknown to some of the smaller districts across the country at some point. But I think now, in keeping up with my former colleagues, a lot of them are talking about these virtual meetings and remote meetings that they're having with their staff now.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So it sounds like the takeaway, from both of your perspectives is do whatever you can to stay connected, communicate, collaborate, and to your earlier comments, Dave, when we talked about preparation, try to anticipate, as much as you can what could come in the news media or from those in need around the district.
Correct.
Guidance. Thank you. Our next question is, what does the new normal look like for you, your team, your district? If you can think ahead, Dave, what do you start to think about as the new normal, in your district there at Joplin?
Yeah. Well, new normal, it seems like I've already been there once before, post-tornado, but our new normal, we're just now beginning to kind of assess what that's going to be. Matter of fact, yesterday we found out that even ordering supplies ahead for next August and hopefully a return to the school buildings is going to be a challenge for some of the typical materials that we're going to use. And so that new normal is learning to do maybe more with less, but certainly as far as buildings go, the cleaning process is going to take a change, and the way that we approach, the fact that we're going to clean a little differently. We had actually begun prior to, I guess, D-Day for this pandemic was Friday the 13th of March. We had actually begun about 2 weeks before that, preparing, trying to foresee a little bit ahead and bringing in some extra materials. But I think that the approach that we've done to cleaning, with especially the high points, the high touch areas in our buildings, we're going to have to spend more time on those, because those are the places where, if we're talking about this pandemic, where those transfer of the virus is going to take place. And so we're going to probably revamp our approach and spend more time on those areas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Darren, are you hearing the same kinds of things from other districts or other leaders kind of assessing and preparing in that same way?
Yeah, and I do hear that quite a bit. But I also am hearing quite a bit just about, activities that would normally and typically be happening this time of year for districts as they plan to close their buildings down. So you think about your last touches with students and staff, proms, graduations, and I know a lot of districts are struggling with how to still deliver these experiences for their students, but yet do those in as safe a manner as possible that's allowable in their states. So I'm hearing things about virtual graduations, or possibly even having some graduates in the buildings with their families in small groups, almost by appointment, and they get to walk across the stage and get their photograph taken. So, absolutely with the new normal, the social distancing, limiting the size of the group or the event, districts are struggling right now trying to figure out how to still deliver a lot of these traditional services for their students and families, but yet, stay as safe as possible too. And then I think, once we get into June and the traditional summer break, I think you're going to see a lot of districts really switch gears to as David mentioned, how do we open up safely? What's it going to look like? Classroom sizes, how do kids ride the bus together? All of these things. I mean, I think there's literally thousands of decisions that are going to have to be thought about and made at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great points, Darren. When I think about our facilities leaders who FMX serve, I think this is an unsung hero profession that a lot of you work early mornings, late at night, you and your teams, and everyone takes for granted the schools, the facilities, the grounds, that magically they just stay maintained and ready. And now, the two of you and others like you are anticipating these things around virtual graduations or other needs that parents, families, and students, are going to look forward to, and you're adapting to serve those needs. So kudos to both of you and everyone listening who perform this type of role. It's that adaptability that I think defines a lot of your profession. Another question, what steps are you taking to ensure your facilities are clean and safe for reopening? And I think, Dave, we touched on this question a little bit earlier, but let's go a little bit more specific about what exactly you're doing, and Darren, will go to you about what else you're hearing.
Well, I always have felt that we've done a good job of keeping our facilities clean and safe, but with this opportunity that we didn't choose to have this pandemic, it's given us cause to reflect and how can we change and do better what we're doing. So one of the things that we did, like I said, in preparing, I think I placed my order for some additional chemical March the 2nd before things hit, but we tried to plan ahead, and we wanted to make sure that we had an EPA registered cleaning solution that would be known for killing the virus. And so we've actually put in place, our existing disinfectant was adequate and was tested for that as well. And so we added a secondary, little stronger disinfectant that we're currently using for treating those high touch areas and taking care of that. Also, one of the things that we had in place for about the past 18 months is ATP testing, which is typically used to tell how clean that you're getting hard surfaces. And we're going to plan on doing some additional testing with that within our sites to try to prove that we're getting things as clean as we hope that we are, and have that data and that documentation for proving that we're doing that. I've also worked with making sure that my staff has heightened awareness about high touch areas and what the challenges are for that. We did some ATP testing previously and found that places that we thought were dirty, yes, were dirty, but places we didn't think about that were better places for germs to hide for us, we were able to identify those. And so we've taken a different approach and trying to make sure that we spend extra time getting those clean as well.
Excellent. Darren, what have you heard around different districts, beyond Joplin and precautions they're taking?
Yeah, as Dave mentioned, the high touch surfaces are definitely something to focus on, as well as some of these other areas where germs may be hiding. And he'd also touched on the disinfectant that he's using. I'm hearing quite a bit from other districts as well about the delivery of these products onto the surfaces or into the airspace using either like a handheld mister device or even a whole room misting machine, for lack of a better word. But I know, and I still keep in contact with a lot of the chemical suppliers, cleaning supplies, and I mean, these things, they can't manufacture them quick enough, it seems like, at this point. And traditionally, you would only find these types of devices in healthcare setting. But I think with the level of cleanliness that's going to be required and expected, in our school buildings, it's going to be almost hospital grade cleanliness. So, it just makes sense to kind of up the ante a little bit with some of our equipment, and take advantage of the latest technology with disinfecting and cleaning school spaces.
Great, great. I think it's some things I've heard from really parents and families in my community, and I have 2 children in school currently, is they're wanting to hear about these precautions the districts are taking to reassure them. And then other districts I've heard are taking guidance from the CDC on hand washing and posting how-to guidance. And we think about washing our hands, and a lot of people do it incorrectly. So I've heard of some districts, posting signs and guidance at those different stations so everyone can do their parts. So thank you for your comments there.
Yeah, and I've had the opportunity to actually visit some of the buildings in Joplin a couple years ago, and the buildings are top notch. I mean, they feel clean, they smell clean, they look clean. But as David mentioned, they have discovered that they may have some areas where germs might be hiding that they are now able to address.
Right, right. No, good feedback, Darren. Thank you. So, some of the concerns we've heard from different folks is, around the cafeteria, hallway, classroom sanitation. What guidance are you giving, Dave, to your custodial staff? How has their work changed, on a daily basis compared to before?
Well, we've because of this time that we're out of school right now, we're kind of doing spring cleaning on steroids, so to speak. So with the time without the students in the building, we're kind of deep cleaning some of those areas that we don't seem to always have time to tackle. So we're doing some of that additional cleaning right now as well. One of the biggest things that most of the disinfectants that are out there, you have to have what they call kill time, and the disinfectant that you put on that surface needs to be sitting on that surface for typically 10 minutes. And so trying to work with my folks to make sure that whether we're spraying or wiping down or misting, as Darren alluded to a while ago, that we're leaving that kill time on there to make sure that we're getting that killed. Then we're trying to, whenever possible, make sure that we go back and wipe that down to make sure that we remove anything that we've killed. But the mainstay is to kill that. Mm-hmm. As far as the hallways, cafeterias, we're going to maintain and maybe clean some of those areas a little more thoroughly than we would typically have done prior to all of this. We have the fortunate opportunity that with our food service workers, they take care of our cafeteria tables and those kind of things, and they're using even a third EPA registered product that's different than what we're using. And so they're taking a similar approach, and as they wipe down the tables and the seats and all of those places where we're going to have student contact, that they're taking even an additional approach than as we come in and clean the floors and take care of those things in places where they touch as they're entering and exiting those cafeteria areas, that we're taking care of those.
Great, great. Darren, any comments on what you're hearing around custodial staffs and new or different ways to manage those groups?
Not really. It sounds like Dave is, pretty much ahead of the curve, with other districts, that I'm talking to as well. And I think that everybody's just trying to focus on those high touch areas. And of course, you congregate students in these areas of assembly, like cafeterias, hallways, and so forth. But I mean, I think Dave's right on. He's right on par with this.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Another thing that we're hearing about are HVAC systems. So the question is, are you taking any special precautions in maintaining your HVAC or air filtration systems to keep everyone occupying the facilities healthy and certainly reassured?
Well, One of the things that we have recently tackled, I guess, so to speak, is we have changed our filter approach. We actually have just rebid our filters for supplying those for the district, which I think is approximately almost 1,800 filters across the district. But what we've done is to seek to upgrade the quality of the filter that we are speccing. And what we were able to achieve is a higher filtration rating, but also we're going to get longevity out of the filtration because we found a company that would supply us with a filter that they are willing to stand behind for a single change for a 12-month period, which saves my folks the time and effort of changing, but also being able to upgrade that to a higher quality of filter will allow us to filter that air more thoroughly without it being problematic. Of course, the top thing with HVAC is to make sure that you're properly running those systems anyway, and that you're getting the correct amount of outside air that has to come in as we get those air changes so that you have fresh air and you can lower the CO2 readings that you have, because as all the studies show that those CO2 readings can have a negative effect on learning.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, we're in this COVID-19 pandemic period, and this is a respiratory illness among other things, but primarily that. So you've really taken outstanding steps to limit that spread and certainly have, this at standard or greater standard than what's recommended. Darren, are we hearing this from other districts, concerns in trying to take new steps?
I do believe so. And, Dave touched on a couple of those things already. But, ASHRAE, which is, I guess you could call them the gospel according to HVAC, they've released a recent document just for building operations during this pandemic. And, they're focusing on a lot of those same things that Dave has picked up on already. And one of those is the filtration, upgrading to a higher quality filter, as Dave has mentioned, the frequency of change potentially, if the filter would need that. And then also consider, ASHRAE says for facility managers to consider increasing the amount of outside air that you're pulling in versus recirculation. And in the Midwest, I'm from Ohio. So, our climate here is, it can be pretty humid at times and it can be extreme as well. But, we've traditionally, in an effort to save energy, facility managers in this area typically try to limit the outside air, with, paying attention to indoor air quality and also providing fresh air for the buildings. But, we would focus a little bit more on recirculation of the building's air to minimize, energy loss. But I think that's going to shift. And ASHRAE is kind of backing that up now, and they're kind of encouraging facility managers to consider opening up those outside air dampers to get more fresh air into the building. And, if you have a type of HVAC system, it's actually called a DCV, which is a demand controlled ventilation system. They're actually recommending for districts to maybe shut those off or reconsider how those systems are controlled. And then another thing ASHRAE is kind of recommending for districts to consider are these portable HEPA room air filtration machines. And I'm not sure, Dave, if you guys have heard of those or considered those, for some of your buildings, but if you have some areas that going to have a high concentration of students or something like that, to consider these portable air cleaners. So, I mean, yeah, that's kind of what I'm hearing, but it sounds like Dave is pretty well ahead of the curve on this one as well.
Excellent. Any comments, Dave, you want to add?
Well, like I said, I still think we're in process of trying to figure out the best approaches, and those portable HEPA filters are an excellent way to help add some additional filtration to that. indoor air quality is in education has long been a challenge, and the additional outside air. How do you weigh between paying more to cool the air down, but making sure that you have enough um, fresh air and oxygen that you don't have high CO2. And so this may be one of those years, especially where with the COVID-19, that you may have to try to sacrifice a little bit of your financial to give yourself more fresh air. But at some point in time, each district's going to have to make their own determination as to can they afford to do that, and is that the best approach for their particular situation.
Mm-hmm. Great discussion. It sounds like preparation is the key, but also, weighing those factors and doing some testing or trial and error, as it were, to tune it for your specific needs. That is good guidance. Thank you. Dave, we spoke about this in your kind of overview highlights, but this really is the second crisis you've seen in the last 10 years. When you think about the pandemic period and your brethren in facilities and operations management, what have you learned? What lessons are you now applying that others can take advantage of?
Well, you learn a lot about yourself. I will say that. You'll learn a lot about you as an individual. One thing that I would say is that you don't stand alone. And that's what we all need to realize. And that's why I hope the folks who are taking advantage of watching this realize that you're not alone, that we all have this challenge that we're trying to deal with the best knowledge that we have. I suggest that people always take the opportunity to get multiple inputs as they make decisions, whether that's within your district or using. Case in point would be, as I was in transportation and helping lead that post-tornado, the software that we use for our transportation routing, we were able to reach out to those folks to join with them, and that's using that software was how we were able to identify those 3,200 students that were displaced. Now, the software company never imagined that their software was going to be used post-tornado or anything that was detrimental to our district, but we were able to use that tool that we had and partner with them to get the information that we needed so that we could take care of our staff, our students, and our community. And so making sure that you have those connections with the folks that can help get you some answers and even thinking outside the box. And that's one thing we learned to do, hopefully very well, was to think outside that box when you have that crisis come up. The other thing that I want to make sure and point out is that you want to prepare as much as you can for that. And usually during the crisis, you want to take lots of good notes that as you go through that, those are things that you can reassess later that may help you with the next crisis, whether it's bigger or smaller. But what you learn from that will allow you to make sure that you can push forward for the next crisis that you may have.
Excellent. Excellent guidance. Darren, what kind of lessons do you see others applying? They maybe have not gone through the same level of crisis that Dave and the Joplin team did, but what are some lessons being applied now that you're observing?
Well, just to build on what Dave was talking about, where he mentioned that you don't stand alone. As I travel across the country, talking with facility managers, whether it be at trade shows or lunch and learns or other events, I'm picking up and hearing more and more about these little pockets of areas where, and it's not necessarily a professional group setting, but it's more of it's kind of a band of brothers, I guess you could say, to where there's a need, first of all, but then there's also some areas of the country that are really picking up on this idea to rely on their colleagues from neighboring districts. And, whether that means, you loan a few buses from your fleet to a neighboring district that maybe had some vandalism over the weekend, or you're loaning cleaning equipment or just advice. Being able to have kind of a sounding board of colleagues that you can call at a moment's notice and say, hey, I've got this going on in my district. How did you handle this, or what would you suggest? And be able to make that phone call and get genuine advice from a colleague that's maybe been there and done that. I think that's really becoming more and more important as we see these new emergencies and these new pandemics and these new situations arise. I think we do need to rely a lot more on each other than we traditionally have, because I can tell you, in my 20 years as a facility manager, sometimes I felt like I was on an island, and some of that was my own doing, because I didn't take advantage of the expertise of my colleagues that were around me. So I think Dave's right on when he says you don't stand alone, but to build on that, let's take it a step further and really start relying on other colleagues and other professionals that may have been through something similar.
It's great guidance from both of you. I was thinking that the competition maybe should stay on the football field or on the basketball court between the districts in a given community, but really the facilities leaders are teaming together and collaborating and sharing. Some have great skill in HVAC, others in cleaning, others in preventive maintenance. So that community effect of sharing the best practices is just great guidance. As you think about your experiences navigating through a crisis, any advice or tips for other districts that you want to share?
Well, one of the things, make sure that you document as much as you can. Document the projects that you do, the time that you're spending, the materials, the approach that you're using. One of the things that we found out was all of the documentation that we did in our particular case, when it came down to FEMA records and whether we were getting reimbursements. That was very important that we made sure that we document. But just by documenting, you're giving you're giving yourself an opportunity to do an overview of your approach. And like I said, you may be able to use that same information or approach in something else that you might deal with later, and documenting it now, because as time goes on, as we lose those firsthand knowledge people, or those firsthand experiences that we have that even 9 years down the road from the tornado, that we don't remember as exactly as we did at the time. So documenting those things now will certainly help you. As we talked about at the start, you want to make sure that you do take whatever time you can to try to prepare, try to think ahead, think outside the box, think of those things, those resources. If you're without power, if you're without water, if you're without whatever, how are you going to continue to maintain to supply the quality of education or the quality of the work that you need to continue to do? And like I said, I look back now, I still don't know how we accomplished what we accomplished, but we did it and we got through it. So I look for that as a marker for me, both individually as we come up against this pandemic, that it's not going to be maybe a lot of fun and it's going to be a speed bump, but we will make it over that speed bump and make it through. So there are several different things that you go through as you're dealing with this. You react, then you respond, then you restore, then you rebuild, and then you look at that resource and the things that you have and how can you make it better for the future. Excellent
guidance. Darren, other guidance that you might have for districts about, any crises or speed bumps, as Dave called them, that they've run into and how they've gotten over them and looked toward the future?
Well, I think, this this pandemic, we're going to look back, 3, 5, 10 years from now, kind of as Dave is doing in retrospect, with the tornado, and we're going to look back and say, I'm not quite sure how we made it through that. And I can't really remember everything we did that made us successful, but I do think we're going to come out on the other side of this. Of course, it's going to look slightly different. I don't think, school is ever going to come back the way that we have known it. But I think, as Dave mentioned, document, take good notes, talk to your resources, talk to colleagues, see how they're going to be doing things over the summer and moving into the new school year, and and just build on that. And I think we're going to look back down the road and say, we were successful in this area, maybe not so successful in this other area, but we did learn from that experience. And learning is what makes us all better people. It lets us find out a little bit about ourselves, as David mentioned. And that's all we can hope for, is to try to get better continually.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your guidance. So in parting, thank you very much, Dave. Thank you, Darren, for joining us today. Certainly encourage you to reach out to Dave. He was so nice to provide his email address here. Any questions that you have to the guidance of both Dave and Darren, reaching out, collaborating, reach out to Dave, reach out to us here at FMX. We're happy to serve you, and thank you for watching. Have a great day.